Now entering Nerdist.com.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, Episode 26, Errand of Mercy.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. You, dear friends, are very lucky. We're here to save you from all other podcasts. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm John Champion. You know, Ken is right. Those other podcasts are no good for you. With our podcast, you'll have laughter and joy, and your kids will do better in school. You'll have fewer cavities and a fighting chance for a peaceful future. Those other podcasts will only lead you to war and destruction. Right, Ken?
What? Oh, yeah, right. I'm sorry, forgive me, John. I'm a little distracted. I'm just finishing up my Starfleet Academy scholarship applications.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you see, John, the Federation invests a great deal of money in training officers like Kirk and Spock, but they don't just hand that money out. In fact, every episode of Mission Log that we've done so far has been part of my scholarship application essay. Now, I do have a backup plan.
Oh, good.
Yeah, if I don't get the scholarship, there is an online academy that teaches Starship Command. You've seen their ads, I'm sure.
Totally.
Hologram of Sally Struthers' giant head pops up offering courses in Starship Command, phaser and botlet repair, or business management and accounting.
Yeah.
So I got a few things working here.
Good. Now, here's the trick. I think that the more Star Trek we watch, the more we'll be able to tell who actually went to the academy and who just did the online course.
we may well. Like that guy from Star Trek 3, the one who was on Hill Street Blues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm thinking he did the online course.
Yeah.
I mean him no offense. That's just my guess.
Right.
Because he seemed to have no idea what to do.
Yeah. And a lot of those, I think they hand out the red shirt at the end of the online training, you know? It's like when you're done with the online training, they just mail you a red shirt. Actually,
they send you an iron-on.
Right.
It's like a big square of red right on the front. You're not even red shirt material at that point. And forgive me, I'm not making fun of online university. Well, I am. I'm making fun of the idea of, becoming a starship captain.
Right.
Through an online university. That's really no way to go.
Right. Well, today we are talking about Errand of Mercy, and it's an auspicious moment for Star Trek. It is the introduction of the Klingons.
Yeah.
So, we're very happy about that. And before we get into what the show is all about, I'm chomping at the bit here, Ken. You know what it's time for?
It's time for trivia, John.
You're right. You remember last week I mentioned Gene Kuhn, otherwise known as Gene L. Kuhn?
Yes.
Well, we have him to thank for coming up with the Klingons. He's the guy who invented them as an enemy and kind of fleshed out what they were like and what their culture was like. So like I said last week, he makes many, many contributions to Star Trek, but this is probably up there with the most important. But we cannot minimize how important the contributions were from John Colicos. He is the actor who plays Kur, the Klingon commander in this episode. And by the way, he also played one of my other favorite sci-fi villains. If you watch the original Battlestar Galactica, he was Baltar.
Really?
And, yeah, he sure was. So before Baltar was like a cool, long-haired hipster, with sort of deep psychological problems, he was just badass John Colicos.
Now, as Baltar in the original Battlestar Galactica,
yeah,
and it's going to sound like I'm making fun, and again, it is because I am. Does he have a perfectly round head?
Pretty much.
I was looking at him, and I couldn't tell if it was because of the hairdo, because he was a Klingon, and then the Fu Manchu and all the stuff that he had going on. I couldn't tell if that made him look like he had a perfectly round, like spherical head, or if he just carries that with him his whole life.
He kind of does. Galactica was 10 years after Star Trek.
Yeah,
and he is a little older. Maybe put on a little bit of weight.
Okay.
And he's kind of a puffy looking man, but
Oh, God, now we're just making fun of him. I feel bad now. I apologize.
No, I'm not making fun. I'm just making
he looked like a grown-up Charlie Brown to me. His head was perfectly round. Great. I mean, and let me just go ahead and before anybody writes horrible email, and we'll give you the address to write horrible email later. He's great in this episode. Yes. All right. Yes. I'm not minimizing everything. I'm just noticing he's got a perfectly spherical head.
Well, and he was great in Galactica, too. The original show gets, I don't know, because we had the new one.
Yeah.
I think the original takes a little bit of a beating, but I still think that there are a lot of good things in the original. And I would start with John Colicos as being one of the best things about the original. But here's the thing. His contribution to that, to what then became the Klingon style, if you will, cannot be understated. He's the guy who came up with the whole Fu Manchu, the mustache, the facial hair, the dark makeup. All of that was his idea. And he kind of presented it to the makeup and stylists on the show. And he made such an impact with this role. He was actually asked to return many, many times, but he never actually made it back until the original series was off the air. There were other, Klingons will reoccur, of course, from now on. And there were Klingon episodes of the original series that were written for his character, that were written for Commander Kor. But we never actually got to see him again in the original series. He will come up later. So stick with us here on Mission Log, and you'll definitely hear a lot more about Kor, years from now.
Now, you got to say really quickly, one of the things that's surprising for people who may have seen the Klingons before but have never seen the Klingons in the original series, because we hear from a lot of people who, are like that. They've watched Next Gen or they've watched Deep Space Nine, but they've never actually, they're going back now and watching the original series, which is, kind of fun to be doing that along with people who've never seen it before. No forehead. Well, not no forehead. Regular forehead.
Right. Smooth forehead.
Smooth forehead. Yes, human forehead, you might even say, or humanoid anyway, not the big sort of exoskeleton forehead that the Klingons have, starting, I guess, in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Yeah. And then every other appearance, including Enterprise, which is, kind of weird.
Right.
Because that predates... I know we're doing the timeline thing, but that predates the original series, and yet you've got a more advanced looking Klingon. But it was a more advanced time. We could do that.
Exactly. But here we are with the first appearance of the Klingons, and there's a lot of groundwork being laid here. And by the way, this is such a tiny little thing, but I have to point it out. I think it was in 1992, the Smithsonian had an exhibit about Star Trek. And then a year or two after that, they kind of broke that down and they toured it to various places. So I caught it at the Air and Space Museum in D.C., and then I caught it again in New York. And one of the things that I found to be so kind of charming, you're walking around, you're looking at the costumes and models and all this cool stuff, and they have one of the original Klingon costumes. I don't know if it was particularly Kor's, but it was one of the original TV series Klingon outfits, and you go up and you look at it up close, and you may have noticed that they all have this belt buckle on, and it's kind of a metallic looking thing, sort of a trapezoid shape, and it's got 5 or 6 kind of buttons on the front of it, and it just looks like a piece of metallic gear that they're wearing. Well, you see it in real life, and you see it up close in this exhibit, as I did, and I thought it was so hilarious that it's actually a piece of bubble wrap that they cut out into this little trapezoid shape and then spray painted it kind of goldish silver, and that is the sort of iconic looking piece of the Klingon costume. Wow. Yeah. 2 things you never want to see made: laws and Klingon belt buckles, and any TV prop. That's probably true. Yeah, and by the way, if you're watching, because I know some people watched the original cut along with Mission Log, other people watch the remastered version of TOS as they're gearing up to listen to Mission Log. But if you're watching the non-remastered edition, you won't see any Klingon ships.
Well, and if you're watching the remastered edition, you'll barely see any Klingon ships, too.
Well, but they're distinctly Klingon ships.
Yes, that's true, yes.
Yeah. So, but there were no Klingon ship models when this show was made. So everything that has to do with the Klingon ship is just purely a reaction on the Enterprise.
There is one more piece of trivia that I want to share. But I need a little participation from you on this. Do me a favor, John. Mm-hmm. Tell me to tell you what's on my mind.
Okay, Ken. Tell me what's on your mind.
Pure energy. Yeah. Okay. I can't do it as well as he does, and I certainly don't have the echo that they have. But if you're a fan of Information Society, you know what I'm talking about. Spock says the words pure energy in this episode. And that sample was used by Information Society for their synth pop classic, What's on Your Mind, Pure Energy, from the album Information Society. I will right now give you, well, I can't do it right now because you're not here, but I will right now give you $10 if you can name one other Information Society song. I
think that's $10 you get to keep in your pocket. What's the other one that I would know?
I have no idea. No,
okay.
That was kind of my point. I was figuring my $10 was safe.
Oh my goodness, I am pure energy. Information Society should totally do a song about me. Pure energy.
Prologue. Hope you didn't think the 23rd century is a charming, peaceful place to put up your feet and sit for a while. There's a conflict brewing. Peace negotiations with the Klingons have faltered, and the Enterprise is dispatched to the planet Organia to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. Should be easy. According to Spock, Organia is just a little agricultural place with nothing in the way of technology. Sounds good. We'll go there. Wait! Incoming Klingon attack. The Enterprise prevails, but now it's war. Act 1. Sulu is in charge while Kirk and Spock beam down to Organia. There they meet the very friendly Aelborn, who seems a little confused when Kirk asks to speak to someone in authority. Aelborn explains that there is no one in authority, but then takes Kirk to the Council of Elders, of which he is the chairman. Oh, that authority. Kirk lays out what's happening. The Klingons are going to come to Organia, set up shop, and enslave all these nice, very nice farmers. The Federation, however, will come in and build schools, share their technology, and keep the Klingons at bay. The Organians react with a sort of, oh, well, that's nice, but no thanks. Kirk is getting a little more indignant, but the Organians are nonplussed. They probably want to get back to sharing patterns for making ankle-length tunics. Then, like that guy in a restaurant who can't put down a cell phone, Kirk takes a call from the Enterprise. Sulu reports that a whole lot of Klingons have just shown up and are attacking. Kirk tells him to get out of there, so he does. Now we've got a few hundred Klingons on Organia, the Enterprise is gone, and Kirk and Spock are stuck talking to a council who just couldn't care less. Act 2. The Council of Elders can't be bothered with much, but they do bother long enough to get Kirk and Spock some of those spiffy tunics so they can blend in, and they take away their phasers. They really don't like weapons. Good timing, too, because the Klingon commander, the tough and ambitious Kur, has just shown up in the council chambers and does his pitch. Follow the new rules or die. Pretty simple. Also, he thinks Spock is probably a spy, but he thinks Kirk, posing as the Organian Barone, is perfect as a liaison to the public. Off Spock goes for a little examination, and off Kirk goes to the new Klingon HQ. When Spock comes back, he's actually just fine. Even after probing his brain, the Klingons still think he's a Vulcan traitor. Spock is mentally disciplined like that. Kirk's job, meanwhile, is to keep the Organian people in line, but on his own, he and Spock are starting to plot on just how to disrupt the Klingon plan. First, they'll destroy a Klingon munitions dump, and surely the Organians will liberate themselves. Well, not so much. The raid on the munitions dump goes really great, but Aelborn and the other Organians are not fazed at all about the show of violence. This is all Kirk needs to launch into a speech about standing up for freedom, and that very speech is being broadcast right into Kur's HQ via a convenient and very large surveillance bug. The Klingons come rushing in, But before the threat of using the mind scanner can settle, Eilborn reveals Kirk's true identity. Act 3. Eilborn is pretty sure that by ratting out Kirk, all will be just okay. Kor has Spock locked up, but takes Kirk back to his office for a drink and a chat. Kor is trying to find common ground. They're both a couple of soldiers looking to expand their empires. Kirk says, but no, his federation is different. Kor is just glad that war gives him some sort of definition in life. So, come on, just reveal some information about the fleet, all right? If not, it's off to the mind sifter for you. Well, why don't Kirk and Spock sit in the dungeon for a while to think this over? When things seem particularly dire, who shows up to rescue them but Eilborn? He says, hey guys, no worries, just come back to the council chamber. Kor, really unhappy about this, implements Special Occupation Order Number 4. In case you're wondering, that means the Klingons will start rounding up citizens and executing them en masse until the prisoners are turned over. In seconds, 200 Organians are dead. Act 4. Eilborn and the Council are totally nonplussed by the death of their people. Kirk pleads with Eilborn to give them back their phasers. He and Spock are going to do something about this. Kirk is all ready to sacrifice himself and Spock if it means saving the Organians, who, by the way, don't really seem like they want to be saved. The raid starts, and Kirk and Spock fight their way into Kor's office, not actually killing anyone, by the way. Kor reveals that the Federation fleet is on its way, but a Klingon fleet will be there to meet them. This war is about to get a whole lot bigger, a whole lot faster. Kor is ready to break out the booze again and toast his good luck. There also happens to be a handful of armed Klingons on their way to stop Kirk and Spock, but just as they enter the room, well, it's time to play hot potato. All the weapons they are holding are suddenly too hot to touch. Cut to the Enterprise, and no one can sit down or get any work done. It's hot. Finally, Eilborn reveals what's up. The Organians are putting a stop to all this nonsense. All the weapons on both sides have been made unusable. The Organians are not about to allow a war to break out. They just abhor violence so much, they're going to take away all the toys. The Organians are really, really powerful, you see. Kirk and Kor are both put off by this. They seem like they want war. The Organians just tell them to give it a rest. If they wait long enough and work out their differences, the Klingons and the Federation will one day become friends. Then their true nature is revealed, as the Organians have grown beyond corporeal bodies. Eilborn and his fellow council members evaporate into a blast of light. Back on the Enterprise, Kirk just seems a little mopey, and Spock asks what's up. Kirk admits that he lost his control. In his zeal to stop war, he became even more warlike.
Evaporate into a blast of light?
They did. They whoosh.
Dude.
They became light, energy.
Pure energy.
Yeah,
Come on,
see,
he gave you the line. You can even sing it. Well, you can't really sing it because they don't sing it.
Pure energy.
Pure energy. Yeah, you left out Spock's C-3PO imitation.
Yeah, he does one, doesn't he?
He does. When Kirk wonders what their chances are of surviving the two-man fight versus the Klingon army,
right.
Spock says that it's hard to say for sure, but he figures the odds to be 7,824.7 to 1. Get 3PO and Spock to Vegas. That's all I'm saying.
No, you know what I'm saying?
What?
Show your work. Do it in longhand and pencil.
Well,
there
it is
go.
dark, so I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but that does factor into my equation.
You know, another thing that Spock puts sort of a very distinct ranking on is the Organians. You know, when they first arrive and they just think that the Organians are nothing but this underdeveloped agricultural stagnant society. Spock says, "Oh, okay, they're a D-." Hey, really? Do you, you know?
I don't think it's like, you know, like grading them like, you know, this is how they performed. Is it?
No. I mean, but he's saying like, okay, if we say that Earth, the Federation, or Vulcan, or something, we're just going to go ahead and say that's an A or an A+.
Well, you know, Vulcan would be an A+.
It would.
Although, here's the thing. I mean, when you consider who was it that brought the Gorn and Kirk to Arena?
Oh, the Metrons. Yes.
Yeah, when you consider like the Metrons or Trelane's mom and dad, or you know the Telosians,
Yeah, they're off the chart.
Well, they may actually be A+. It's quite possible the Vulcans would only rate like a B-.
Right.
I don't know. Somebody should ask Spock that sometime.
I find it very interesting that he's got a report card, and he's just constantly walking around.
Yeah.
Like he's keeping tabs on this.
I'll tell you what I found interesting. Before we know how powerful the people on we just named 4 other planets, and now I've completely the Organians. Before we know how powerful they are, how about Kirk's just open disdain for the Organians?
Yeah, no kidding.
Just absolute don't like you, don't like your planet, gonna go die for you anyway. If you'll excuse me now, I got to be all Christ-like. If Christ was a guy with a starship and phasers hell-bent on killing his enemy. I don't know. It's just, it's really, like 2 or 3 times he's like, I don't like you. I mean, just like flat out. Like, I don't like you. Yeah.
Yeah. He's not too willing to learn.
Yeah, it's one of those things, This week we need him to not be too willing to learn, so he won't be. There are other times that he's just like, all let up with sympathy and understanding for other people. But, then the story doesn't move along. Got 48 minutes, people. 48 minutes. I can't be all nice to everybody right away.
I thought it was interesting that when they made over Spock, that they said, well, he can pass as a Vulcan merchant because Vulcan merchants are not uncommon.
Yeah, Spock said that they're not uncommon.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I know. Right.
Because we haven't seen one in 20 whatever episodes up to now.
No. And do they sell everything? I mean, do they just pull up a ship alongside and say, hey, check out the goods, So apparently this is how they fund their much more advanced technologies on Vulcan.
Right. The science. What's their, I'm just forgetting everything now. It's not League of Science. What's the High Council or whatever?
The Vulcan Science Academy?
Yeah, sure, if you want to. I mean, is there like a traders guild as well?
Oh, there must be. I think they're highly organized.
That Spock could have joined if he hadn't joined Starfleet.
Right.
Selling is an honorable and logical career.
It is. And buying the extended warranty on anything is logical, too.
Oh, absolutely. That's very logical. Yeah.
Hey, we mentioned how much John Colicos kind of rules in this episode as Core. He's really great. He skirts that line between just chewing the scenery, but also being kind of believable and a little deeper than just the bad guy of the week. But I have to say, for as much credit as we gave to John Colicos, some of the other Klingons look like they weren't thought out as well. Like the makeup and the costumes don't fit quite right, and they just sound like a guy from who is off work, say from the commissary at Desilu, and they brought him in, and they're not quite in character the way that John Colicos is. So I'm glad that we have him there to finally he sets the bar, and then the other Klingons that come after him in future episodes have to kind of have a bit more of a character, because some of the other Klingons here, they don't do it for me.
Yeah, they're just there to fill the Klingon suit.
They are, but it just seems like they're on their way to lunch.
Well, especially that one part where they are on their way to lunch. And by the way,
exactly.
Kirk and Spock are talking a little loud about their plans in the middle of the day, right near what actually looks to be a Klingon commissary. I guess it was an Organian commissary. Right. Well, except of course the Organians don't eat what there being pure energy, but it's the set that they set up as a commissary for anybody who happens to show up.
Yep.
Yeah, and Kirk and Spock are just standing there going, "Yeah, I think we should blow some stuff up later. What do you think?"
Well, and what do they blow up? They blow up the Klingon munitions dump.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do the Klingons fly around the galaxy with ships full of gunpowder?
Well, I don't know. I mean, they blew it up with a grenade.
Yeah.
That they got from somewhere. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they didn't get it from the Organians, nor did they have it on them, because they're wearing the Organian clothes. So they must have stolen that from the Klingons. But the Klingons, I mean, there are two things that are kind of weird that they move around with fairly conventional weaponry, and that they just leave it sitting out unlocked.
Yeah,
That's the other thing, because Spock has apparently very easily gotten a grenade
Yeah.
which he says has a long fuse or a timed fuse, and that's, by the way, 6 seconds. This is how long you get on that fuse. And then he just opens up a box and drops a grenade in it, and then they run. They don't get behind anything; they just run. Biggest explosion I think bigger than the Gorn explosions in Arena, or
big time.
Yeah. But just we'll just leave those out there.
Yeah.
The Enterprise wrestles with the Organians, the Klingons wrestle with the Enterprise, and John and Ken wrestle with Errand of Mercy.
So to me, watching Errand of Mercy, I can't help but think about it in the context of when it was made. 1967, and we are in the thick of the Vietnam War, and that whole thing had been escalating since the 1950s. But by the late 60s, public sentiment about Vietnam was very negative for a variety of reasons. And to me, I can't help but think about this episode as a reaction to the Vietnam War.
I wonder, though, if you would think about it that way. It feels to me like this is an episode that could have been made any number of times. So let's say this episode was not part of the original series, but instead was made during, let's say it was made for Next Generation. I mean, could you not just as easily apply it to, well, probably not the first Gulf War, because the first Gulf War, was about 28 days, I guess. I mean, it was a very short, very, right. I won't say sweet, but it was a very short. It was more of a display of force than it was an actual war. Nothing like the second time we invaded Iraq. I wonder, though, do you see it as a Vietnam parable? You're just basically putting yourself in that time. There's nothing specifically Vietnam about this.
No. Here's the thing. If you look at our various histories of war, and there are some wars that have a lot of public support and other wars that don't have a lot of public support. It just so happened that this episode came at a time during a war where there was a growing protest movement about the war.
Sure.
And I think what this episode does very nicely is it addresses war in general. It addresses the idea of war, which was topical. But I don't think we're being necessarily specific and saying, like, well, these political machinations that got us into Vietnam, et cetera.
Right.
We're not picking apart that.
Okay. Yeah, because,
we are. Yeah.
Well, one of the Planet of the Apes movies, I can't remember which one, but one of the Planet of the Apes movies has young chimpanzees, obviously teenage chimpanzees, or, what would be the analog of teenage kids, protesting the war against the humans.
Yeah.
And that very much was Vietnam to me. It was, here we have the old people and they're all pro-war, but then there are these kids that are not. A lot of the things that were brought up around the Vietnam War, not just war is bad, but you had basically a lot of younger kids who, didn't have the romanticized versions of war that, sort of were inspired a lot by World War II, I think, and soldiers returning home from that. There's not the sort of establishment versus counterculture in this. It's more just, like you say, a study of war overall.
Yeah, exactly. It's the bigger picture, but to me, you can't help but link it to what was going on at the time the episode was made.
Now, you see, what's interesting is I got a bit of Balance of Terror off this episode.
Big time, yeah.
Yeah, the Klingon commander, Kor, likens the Federation to Klingon society, and though Kirk rankles at that idea, he's not necessarily wrong, I don't think. Kor isn't. I do have a bit of a hard time believing that it would be the Klingon commander who would have come to that conclusion. It seems more likely that it would be Aelborn, or one of the council members, maybe, who might look at them and go, oh, you two are so alike. Or Spock, might also do that, just, in the understanding that, a soldier is a soldier. Even if you're fighting for different things, there are some things that are similar in the way you work. It's interesting that you mentioned Vietnam, actually, because I saw something, I can't remember, it doesn't matter when, by the time people hear this, because who knows when they will. There was a really interesting story, though, about a commander. I want to say somebody who was in some sort of authority, but on the ground in Vietnam, going back to meet one of the guys against whom he fought. Not like an individual, not like they, went mano a mano, but his sort of counterpart commander. And they hugged.
Yeah.
And they talked about the similarities and differences in what they had gone through. And it's really kind of a fascinating thing to think about, especially when you're talking about, well, that was going on at that time. Then you do have the Organians saying, yeah, one day you guys are going to be buddy-buddy.
Right.
Which, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say that the two people in the news piece that I had seen are buddy-buddy at this point. But, with war behind them, with the fight behind them, they see more of their similarities than they do the differences that they had.
Well, and I don't know that I saw the specific story that you did, but certainly I've heard and I've seen similar things about soldiers who fought in World War II.
Yeah,
an Allied soldier meets one of the ex-Nazi soldiers who was involved in combat as well, and they weren't necessarily mano a mano, but they share this common experience that only they can understand.
Right.
And there is a sort of human bonding because of that, and they're able to put the politics of what happened at that time behind them, and find a new way to understand each other. Now,
can I ask you a question?
Of course.
We talked about how sometimes Kirk is one who will learn and who will understand, and sometimes he's not. You've got down in the notes here, Kirk saying, "I'm a soldier, not a diplomat."
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's always applicable? I mean, or is it that whole thing that we've talked about before where, well, last week it was written by, DC Fontana, and this week it's written by Gene Kuhn. So, we're going to get a different thing. And next week it's going to be written by somebody else entirely. And then 2 months from now, or next season, there'll be this guy that we've never heard of before writing about these little fuzzy things. Does the changing nature of the characters, depending on, what the situation is, bother you? Does it take you out of it too much? Or was it fine for Kirk to say, "I'm a soldier, not a diplomat"?
To me, that line, and that's why I wrote it down here, that line really stuck with me. And I thought it was a little difficult to reconcile with who we say we are as humans a few hundred years from now and what our job is a few hundred years from now. Because when he says, "I'm a soldier," you're talking about a strictly military organization.
Right.
And he is there to follow orders and fight.
Right.
And there are I also thought of Taste of Armageddon. This, like you said, has a parallel to Balance of Terror, because at least you have the two commanders kind of seeing what their similarities are. And like you, I'm a little surprised that Spock holds his tongue so often in these, because to me, he would be the first guy to notice this and point it out.
Yeah, Spock should actually start every episode. Here we go again.
Yeah, right. Right. But I was thinking, again, of A Taste of Armageddon, because it's not necessarily soldier Kirk, but it is the sort of action-oriented Kirk that just goes in and says, "Okay, I'm changing this. I'm doing this now, whether you want it or not." And we had kind of a discussion whether or not you could justify those decisions. But it seems like in this instant, with Kirk saying, "I am a soldier, not a diplomat," I keep thinking, well, to me, part of your job, at least as I understand it, is to be a diplomat. You're
not as much of a jerk as a lot of the diplomats we've seen from the Federation, but yeah, you're sort of, you're right. I mean, his whole thing of he's going to go in and change it. I mean, there's a sort of a return of the Archons in this. Yeah. Your society is not advancing. At least, they can't see that it's advancing because of the, I don't want to go so far as to say chicanery or skullduggery, but as far as the tomfoolery, let's say, that the Organians are sort of playing before the members of the Federation and the Klingons. The way we see it, their society is not advancing and it needs to. So let's get on that, okay? Except, of course, there's no switch. There's no computer that he can either turn off or destroy.
Right.
And so he just ends up being, kind of stymied by it.
Here's the thing. We've seen Kirk be a better diplomat than the diplomats we've introduced on the show so far.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. And then we've seen Kirk be more compassionate than anybody else on the show in Devil in the Dark.
It goes to what, if people have been listening to the supplemental episodes, it goes to what Robert J. Sawyer said when he was on supplemental number 2, if you have not heard that really Gene Roddenberry was putting together an anthology show in space. So you've got some of the same characters, and that makes it possible for the viewer to become invested. And it certainly gives us a good, like, okay, well, we have this explanation. We have this. There's a reason that we can talk about this planet that's sort of 1,000 years behind Earth, and then this other planet that's about 5,000 years ahead of Earth. We can talk about that because we have these guys going out and exploring it. But they really are writing a new show every time. It's not until later,
right,
that continuity becomes more of an issue. You might even argue it's not until the motion picture, maybe, that continuity actually becomes a more important thing.
Mm-hmm. You could say that.
All right.
But
I think I will someday then.
I think you just did. Oh. But here's the thing that I actually really do like about this episode and about Kirk's character in this is that for any kind of dramatic storytelling, you have to have a character grow in some way. The character has to learn something. It's kind of funny that in the 90s, a show like Seinfeld was the show that broke that mold, where the characters don't learn anything. They don't grow, and they're no better at the end than they were at the beginning. But that's a very different show. Star Trek is here to hopefully teach us a little something, enlighten us with a little something. And in this case, Kirk is all ready for war. And in fact, he can't even conceive of what is wrong with that attitude until the Organians lay the smackdown. So his position on this evolves. And I think that's a great character moment. Now, whether or not that continues on, because if we're kind of abandoning this idea of continuity, or at least a strict continuity,
right?
That may or may not come up again. But at least in this case, he does grow beyond his initial position.
Actually, I found myself wondering, like, how long does Aelborn's "it's hot, too hot to handle" spell work? Because if it's going to stop in 5 minutes, then we're going to be at war again with the Klingons in 10 minutes, right? Right. Fascinating pan-dimensional being, by the way, who's like standing there in the council room. They've always thought that he was just this, idiot. I don't want to fight. Guy. And it turns out that not only is he now turning all of their phasers too hot, but when they go to punch each other, they're too hot to punch. All of their ships are down. And he says, I am right now on the Klingon Empire homeworld and on the Federation homeworld, and I'm shutting your armies down. I'm shutting down your ability to fight. Anything that you guys might pick up and use to hit each other or kick each other or stab each other or shoot each other, you can't touch it now.
Right.
And great, super being. How long do they do that, do you suppose, before it wears off?
I think there's a little problem with that plan.
Well, no, it's a neat idea. Now, I will say the one thing that it made me think of this episode, the very beginning of this episode, actually, and this is going to sound a little crazy, but I'm fairly used to doing that on this show. It made me think of self-help stuff and power of positive thinking kind of things. Like Kirk says the Federation is expecting a sneak attack. And what do you know? There's a sneak attack. And they say they're expecting war. And what do you know? There's war. What if they'd been expecting puppies? Or more seriously, what if their posture had been one of peace? One of assuming that diplomacy would prevail, because even though we're given to understand that they're sort of at the bargaining table when this begins, but they're at the bargaining table going, well, yeah, okay, we'll try it, but it's, not going to work. Wow. And that didn't lead to peace, huh?
Yeah. Well, that's just exactly it. That's exactly why I'm a little dismayed by the position of Kirk from the beginning here, is that we've seen diplomat Kirk. Mm-hmm. We've seen compassionate Kirk, and his ability to hopefully draw peace out of a difficult situation is just not even on the table here at the beginning.
Well, that has nothing to do with Kirk, though. It's the Federation.
Well, it's the whole Federation.
Right. It's the Federation that's radioed them and said, expect a sneak attack.
Right.
Okay, so basically, the whole of the Federation, there's no part of it that's saying, no, this is going to work out. I mean, the whole of the Federation is saying, yes, this is not, sharpen your batleths, Klingons. Yeah. And we'll, sharpen our phasers because maybe that will do something.
Right. But, Kirk is, I'm entertained by his speeches in this because he gets so worked up that the Organians are just not having it. They're just not interested. They have that kind of blank look on their faces when he's saying, like, we'll build schools, we'll give you our technology, we'll help you cure disease, and they're just sort of rolling their eyes, and he is going to civilize these people if it kills them. There's kind of this imperialist idea here.
Well, yeah, it goes back to that. We've talked about it several times now, the whole Native American thing too. I mean, he shows up, he's practically brandishing a Bible. I mean, he's very much the missionary man in this, saying, just, come to our way of thinking, and all this can be yours.
Right.
By the way, we have an entire race that's coming to kill us. Really, come on, be like us.
Yeah. You would think that he would see the irony, or at least the difficulty in that from early on. But I guess he didn't. But let me ask you this, though. So here's the Organians.
Yeah.
They are evolved, according to Spock, potentially millions of years beyond what humans understand,
right?
And to them, violence is unthinkable. But I have to assume that for the Organians to have gotten to where they are, there must have been violent episodes in their past. They have to have some understanding of violence,
right?
And have gotten past that. I don't know. I don't know if I totally buy it that they are able to exist that way.
Oh, look who it is. Oh, look who it is.
Uh-huh.
It's our good friend. We have to struggle to survive. It's our good friend. I need my pain, Kirk, except played by John Champion.
You're very welcome.
You remember him from This Side of Paradise, don't you?
Right. Yes.
What is with you? Okay. So let me get this straight. I just want to make sure I understand.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
We're never going to evolve. We're never going to get to a place where we're not doing this crap that Star Trek is sort of railing against. Is that what you're saying?
I hope we evolve.
Okay, no, you don't, though, because you argue against it every time we come to it.
Every not time arguing against it.
You're saying you don't believe it can happen.
No, I'm saying that we have struggle and we have violence, and yes, it is.
Yes, we do today.
It is our desire. It is our hope. It is our duty if we want the species to survive to get past that. But there will always be some sort of outside obstacle, whether you want to call it a threat or even a violent threat. I feel like there will still be an outside obstacle. And the Organians, being these powerful beings who may have spread out many, many places throughout the universe, surely they have come across this before.
You got to free your mind, dude. No, I mean, forgive me. I mean, we have to accept the possibility that we're going to get past this. We more than accept the possibility. The only problem with accepting the possibility, here I'm going to be Guru Ken again. More than accepting the possibility, we actually have to accept, I don't want to say the inevitability of it, because inevitability implies a lack of free will. But we have to assume that reality is attainable, that someday we're not going to have a struggle. And I'm not saying that we don't have that today, but we have to go ahead and glom to the idea that one day we won't. Otherwise, we always will. If everybody walks around and saying we're always going to be fighting, then we're always going to be fighting. I mean, this goes back to what I said earlier about Starfleet's expectation or the Federation's expectation. Their expectation was that there was going to be war. Well, then, of course, there's going to be war. And so if we say, we're never going to be anything if we're not always fighting something, then we're always going to be fighting something. And then I don't understand what we're evolving towards, unless what we're evolving towards is a more warrior-like race.
But can you get to a point where you're so far removed from the idea of there being any sort of outside threat or any sort of violence that then you're totally unprepared for the moment when there is?
They weren't totally unprepared. They were completely prepared.
Well, and that's kind of an interesting idea that I like about this. Is that, the idea that the Organians evolved to a non-corporeal existence, which I don't know that you can necessarily evolve to that. I think you have to kind of create that. if such a thing is even remotely possible. But what they evolved then is a kind of defense. It's sort of, their ability to defend themselves is based on, I guess, their ability to appear and disappear at will, to create a totally false physical world for their, I guess, potential threats, potential enemies to get lost in, while at the same time hiding themselves, and then using this heat ray thing, not a ray, but their ability to make things hot. I don't know, is that a good superpower, Ken, just to be able to make things hot?
Well, it seemed to work for the Organians.
Well, it's good for heating up tea.
I don't know. I mean, here's the thing, though. You're still thinking in very warlike. I mean, you're doing Klingon Federation kind of thought there. The Organians.
I'm a soldier, not a diplomat.
The Organians have no enemies. I mean, the Organians have no enemy. There is no threat to the Organians. The only time they get involved is when they see two other groups about to kill each other. And had the Federation and the Klingons not chosen their planet on which to fight, the Federation and the Klingons would have been allowed to kill each other. I mean, this is sort of like what happened in Arena with the Gorn, right? Kirk's chasing the Gorn ship, or the Enterprise is chasing the Gorn ship, and they happen to pass too close to this other alien race that views them as a threat. Well, the Organians don't even view them as a threat, but it is happening where they exist. Now, if they're pure energy, you kind of wonder, no, it's not a threat. That's why they don't care. That's why when the Klingons show up and they're like, you're going to live by our rules, and the Organians like, fine, we'll live by your rules. What do we care? Because the whole thing is really just created for the Klingons and the Enterprise anyway. I mean, if you want to fault this episode logically, why do they even bother presenting themselves? I mean, if I land on the planet, why wouldn't I just go, what are those lights? Good thing it's got air we can breathe. Let's move on. You know what I mean? There's no reason for them to make themselves a sort of medieval society to present themselves to anybody who shows up, because anybody who shows up, not going to be from a medieval society. So it's not like you're, you're not. That part escapes me. Okay.
Well,
that part doesn't make sense.
If the Federation and the Klingons are not threats to them, because obviously the Organians are more powerful, I mean, why care about that at all? They could just up and leave, go to another planet, another part of the galaxy or another part of the universe, and set up their medieval farming village there and wait for the next people to come along.
Well, it's home, isn't it? All their stuff's there. No.
But they don't need stuff.
Right, they don't have stuff. They don't
have stuff.
Oh, but the lighting is so good on Organia. Yeah. It's sort of like they got to be somewhere, right? I mean, it really doesn't seem like they would have to be somewhere because they're energy, but they got to be somewhere. And so when something comes that they find abhorrent, that's when they get involved. But it's only because they find it abhorrent. Now you ask, don't they have any kind of history of violence? Well, they must. I mean, that's got to be the reason they find it so abhorrent. I mean, they do say that however many hundreds of thousands of years ago, if not more, they used to be, humanoid, just like the Klingons and the Enterprise. So one assumes that there was fighting at that point. Somewhere along the way, they evolved past that. And whether it's that they remember how ugly they thought it was for their own society, or whether it's just that now that they've attained this, sort of enlightenment, kind of, sorry about the pun, but not really. Now that they've attained enlightenment, it just sickens them to see people fighting, or to see, other life forms fighting. I will say it's kind of funny. They do dish back the disdain that Kirk was giving them earlier. And of course the Klingon commander is too, but you expect that from the Klingons. The disdain that they dish back. What is it they say? One of the council members says, "We find it disgusting."
Yeah, right.
To interfere. I mean, this is repugnant to them. That's the biggest reason they're stopping it. It's almost like they don't even care about the lives that would be lost, although they certainly make sure that no lives are lost. But they just find the whole thing very, very distasteful.
Right.
Which I found kind of amusing. And then, one of them does say, it is painful for you to be here, for us, which I thought was kind of amusing too. It's like, wow, they really don't. Yeah, we thought we had disdain for them. Yeah, no, I can't even be in the same planet with you. No, please, just go. Well,
all the Organians are very blunt and very honest about everything, which I mean, they're not honest about what their true nature is, because again, I see this as kind of a defensive.
Well, no, they
tact.
tried to be. You see, why do you? Okay, why defensive? There is no threat. They're not defensive.
Well, yeah, but why bother to show themselves at all as humanoids in a medieval farming village? To me, that's sort of like, well, we're going to have a way for us to interact with you,
right?
But we're still not telling you our true nature. We're still not telling you what we are and what our powers are. We're kind of holding our cards close to the chest here.
Well, they actually tried to in Act 1, but then the Klingons showed up.
Yeah.
I got the feeling that Elborn was about to tell him. He actually says, no, you don't understand. And then they get like, then his radio goes off because they're getting attacked.
Right.
Sulu is calling down to say, I gotta run.
Right. Well, the thing that there are many things I like about this episode, but the thing that I really like here is that, going back to this idea of an anti-war story, but it's told from a different point of view than we normally get to see. This is one of the cool things that science fiction can do. You can introduce a totally different species, totally different civilization, so far removed from our own, and they can sort of not just take one, but many, many steps back to look at us and look at our petty squabbles. At the end of the episode, Spock has this line about how we must look to the Organians the way that amoeba look to humans.
Right.
So insignificant, so powerless, and so pathetic. Would it matter to us if amoeba are fighting each other? No, it wouldn't. And whatever motivation for that fight is, it has no bearing on us whatsoever. So I like the idea that the story is told in that way. I mean, it still makes you wonder, okay, well realistically, whenever there is a conflict in the world, in the real world, we at least, as a government, we kind of decide, are we going to be involved or not? Even in the lead up to World War II, the war in Europe was something else. It was something over there that didn't affect us until we couldn't ignore it anymore. But I guess you do have to ask the question, would a total just stop to what was happening, would that have really been the best outcome? You always have to say, well, okay, if World War II hadn't happened, and if these people had been allowed to carry on with their plans, their politics, well, the world would be a much worse place. So we do have to get involved to some extent.
Well, yeah, but we're not a pan-dimensional race of beings, are we?
Well, exactly. We're not separated from that,
right?
But you have to, so if you look at that from the Organian perspective, oh, look, here's one group of continents or one group of countries fighting this other group of countries. It's just a pathetic little skirmish. We'll let them fight it out, Or if you're Organian, we'll not let them fight it out. We'll make all of their weapons super hot so they can't touch them.
Well, again, it came to their place. I mean, they chose to fight the fight in the Organians' backyard. I will say, I mean, it seems to me that one of the messages here, again, we find out that not fighting is as simple as not fighting. We talked about this a bit in The Taste of Armageddon, or A Taste of Armageddon.
I absolutely love that, yeah.
It's different here, though. There, we didn't have the ugliness of war as a deterrent. So, they kept on and kept on and they kept on and they kept on because there was no blood. There were no bad pictures. It was, we live comfortably and we die comfortably. We just, step into the closet and suddenly, like Doug Henning, we're no longer there. Ta-da! Except for the part where we're not coming back at the end of the show. Right. Here we find out that when no one dies, no one dies. When we can't fight, it does not mean anything. And that seems to sort of surprise Kirk. he's got a full head of steam when the weapons are disabled. He's upset that the Organians are interfering with his ability to kill and to be killed, a fact that later embarrasses him. It turns out, though, that not being able to fight is not the end of the world. In fact, it's quite the contrary.
Right.
And so it seems like your question is, is fighting to a stalemate, and then we just... Does that solve everything? Well, no, that doesn't solve everything. But if you've not got the ability to hurt anybody anymore, if you've not got the ability to lord it over anybody anymore, like you say, well, if we had just fought to a stalemate, then or if we had never had World War II, if we had never fought, then these horrible things would have happened and would have continued. I mean, what this episode is sort of assuming is, okay, well, we've stopped the horrible things, so now what do you got to fight about? You can't hit each other anymore, so you're just going to stand around and yell at each other? Or do you realize the futility of what it was that you were doing in the first place? That seems to sort of be the crux here to me.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, we've also introduced the idea in this episode that Klingons have slaves. So, okay, even if we can't fight Klingons because we've taken away the ability to use our weapons, well, if we all go our separate ways, the Klingons still get to go their separate way and apparently keep their slaves. I don't know.
What slaves do they have? I mean, when they take over a place, they do enslave the people.
Yeah, we enslave the inhabitants of that planet. Yeah.
Yeah.
At least that's the position that Kirk is taking up, and I don't know that it is countered at any point during the show. No,
although you're kind of... Well, we both do this, so I guess it's okay that you're doing it. You're extrapolating a bit. I don't think, again, the Organians weren't... I mean, they were trying to stop a fight that was happening in their backyard.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't, they're not trying to rectify both societies. One does hope that what will happen is that they will, come to this place where they are unable to kill each other, and that gives them pause. That they then stop and think, well, I wonder if we actually should have been trying to kill each other in the first place. Right. I mean, you can't fix everything in one day. It's sort of like what Spock says at one point in the episode. Even the gods did not spring forth fully formed, or something along those lines.
Right.
I mean, basically, he's saying that these incredible super beings that have gotten all peaceable and all powerful didn't start out that way. It takes time, and so he also says that they have nothing to be embarrassed about in the way that they acted, because they're evolving. Just as, at one point a very long time ago, the Organians did as well.
Right. Well, and again, the Organians, super advanced race, and the Enterprise encounters them, and then we just get out of there.
Yeah. Well, we were told to leave.
We were told, yes.
I mean, you've seen how powerful they are. Now, the thing is, if we stayed, it's not like they were going to kill us, because that's abhorrent to them. Right. But yeah, this is not like when we just sail away from... I know you just told me earlier. Who was it again in Arena?
Oh, the Metrons.
The Metrons. Yeah. Thank you very much. This is not like that, where, although the Metrons actually did they very politely told us to go away. Don't call us, we'll call you. If you guys get advanced enough, we'll get in touch.
I kind of like to think the Organians are the same way. They wouldn't fight you, they wouldn't kill you, but if you stick around too long, they're like, hey, shouldn't you guys be going now?
Some say a good deed is its own reward. Others say no good deed goes unpunished. What do we take away from the deeds in Errand of Mercy?
Time now to do that thing we do where we ask the questions and we give the answers. Starting with the whole thing about, does the show hold up? Let's do it from a production standpoint first. John, does the production that we're dealing with this week stand the test of time?
I think kinda, mostly. We've done this before. We give it a qualified yes. There are production problems here. There are some logical holes here. The munitions dump is a bunch of cardboard boxes.
Yeah.
And I feel like we repeat the same ground a bit a few times in the episode, but I think the performances are strong, and I think the concept is strong. So I will give it a qualified yes. How about you?
Yeah, it's neat to see from whence the Klingons came. It is weird, having watched a bunch of other Star Trek, to basically paint a guy brown and say, now he's a Klingon. you know,
Yeah, right.
as opposed to, you know, putting on the big forehead or giving them the long, you know, the long hair, things like that. Not a bat'leth to be seen.
Nope.
Although their disruptors or their phasers actually do sort of carry that same look through everything that I can remember as far as Star Trek is concerned. So, I mean, it's almost like watching an early sketch of something. It's like, you know, the early sketches of Mortimer Mouse, who of course became Mickey Mouse, which of course, you know, led to an empire. You've got the early sketches of the Klingons here that will lead to just a whole bunch of stuff in the future. So if you can look at it in that respect, then yeah, it definitely stands up. Are there holes? Are there goofy bits? Sure. Like, you know, leaving the munitions in U-Haul boxes unlocked outside the city gate does seem like a silly idea.
Right.
Of course, it also seemed like a fairly safe idea because the Organians, you know, they wouldn't do anything against anybody. They literally wouldn't hurt a fly. And so when the Klingons left all the munitions there, you know, what's going to happen to them? Nobody here is going to do anything. They didn't realize at the time that they had the Federation peeps.
Right.
All right. So then let's do the sort of the harder parts, the messages, morals, meanings, that kind of thing. What's the message in this episode? Is there one episode? I mean, is there one message, or are there several? And if there is or are, what is or are they?
Well, I think the overarching message here, it's much too simplistic to say war is bad. You know, that would be a very easy message to do. Okay, fine. But to me, what I find really interesting about this episode is that it's about the mental exercise to remove oneself from that limited field of vision that we have, and we're emotionally invested in one side versus the other side. You know, the Organians in this case are meant to be us, to say that, well, when you look at a conflict, can you remove yourself from the knee-jerk reaction of choosing one side over the other? Can you remove yourself enough to say, well, what they're really fighting over is either insignificant, or can we just step away from the idea of a fight at all? You know? Mm-hmm. So I very much like that message, that idea here. That, like I said, it would be too simple just to label it war bad. But I like the idea that the show wants us to think harder when we come across something that is a conflict.
See, I would actually make the message simpler. I wouldn't even say war is bad. I would say war is dumb.
That's a good way of putting it.
And it's not, I mean, and here's the thing. People are going to think that I'm some giant pacifist, you know, if I say that. I understand the need for fighting. I understand the need for battle. I understand, you know, the need to defend yourself. What I don't understand is the need for aggression. I mean, if somebody is coming at you with a knife, be prepared, defend yourself. And if you've got a gun, I would say, you know, judiciously. You know, maybe you don't necessarily have to shoot somebody, though. You can just sort of show them that you've got a gun. If they're 20 feet away with a knife and you sort of, you know, it's like Jake Johansson used to say. He felt like freeway shootings were really overkill. That you can just, you know, show the guy in the next car that you have a gun, and probably he's going to back off.
Right.
You know?
Right.
I'm not saying that there's never a need for any sort of show of force, and certainly I'm not saying there's never a need to defend yourself. But a lot of the stuff that we end up killing each other over is just silly and stupid. So I would honestly say that overall the message seems to be war is dumb. Not defending yourself is dumb. Not that there's never a reason to do battle, but, you know, for the most part, war is stupid. You believe one thing, somebody else believes another, fine. You got a piece of land, you want their land, well, they're already there, so no, why don't you go ahead and stay where you are? War is dumb. Yeah, in sort of the grand scheme. It seems to me is the message, and I love that message. I agree with that. So send your letters. Go ahead. I'm ready.
Yeah, but I think you and I can both say that holds up.
Yeah, well,
sure.
I think you and I can.
Yeah,
I think most people listening can too.
Yeah,
and I think the people who can't already don't like me. So you know, I'm really fine with that. Hey, speaking of which, if you want to write and tell me, you know, that I'm dumb, thinking that war is dumb, or if you want to write and say something, wonderful about what we've seen or said, or if you want to talk about episodes a little bit further ahead, I got to say, well, we'll say that on a supplemental. There are plenty of ways to reach us. That's really what I want to say. Facebook, Skype, and Twitter all operate under one handle. That handle is Mission Log Pod. So, however those work on those different things, do those that way and you'll be all set. You can also pick up the phone and give us a call, 323-522-5641. That number again is 323-522-5641. You can email us, missionlog@roddenberry.com. Missionlog@roddenberry.com is the email address. And don't forget to check out our website, missionlogpodcast.com. Remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log.
Hey, speaking of upcoming episodes of Mission Log, I know that you're really into alternative music.
It is pure energy as far as I'm concerned.
Well, next week, we're going to rock out with The Alternative Factor.
Some of the music for the Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com, and from the album Messages by Key Theory, free to download at kitheory.com. I think Information Society should reunite and do songs about every alien race in Star Trek. I'm going to get in touch with their people. And transmission.
Now leaving Nerdist.com.